12, the town-wide HMO Article 4 direction, which is on page 279 to 285.
Thank you, Chair. This report concerns an issue that is of growing concern in the town. It's part of what is happening, not just accidentally, but because of the pressures on housing all over the country. And at the root of it all is that there's not enough housing. Whereas we used to years ago, perhaps an HMO wasn't called wasn't really referred to as an HMO. It's a place where somebody invited guests to stay at their houses as lodgers. There was typically a landlord or a landlady living in the house. Whereas we've moved now to these things being exploited commercially and sometimes completely outrageously. Of course, most HMOs are well managed and they provide a useful place for people to live who only want that or can only afford that type of opportunity. But we found that because of the restrictions of the permitted development, or if you like, the opposite of restrictions, the ability for people to set up HMOs, there was very little power we had to have any sort of control over the situation. We've recently confirmed that in fact we do have powers, and these powers are contained in a set of covenants that very wisely applied to every property by the Harlow Development Corporation, and they require properties that were built for families to in fact remain as properties for single family dwellings and not to be used for commercial activities. Since we finally established that these powers were available to us late last year, we've already used them to deny HMOs to be provided in a number of circumstances where we didn't consider them appropriate. Those covenant powers apply to most of the properties that are likely to come forward for HMO conversions, because they apply to all the properties transferred to the council in 1978 under the Transfer of Housing and Related Assets. There were, of course, properties that were either pre-existing in town or built by the Development Corporation for sale, or in fact were sold prior to 78 by the Development Corporation themselves, who had their own right to buy scheme. I remember being offered the right to buy my small house in Meadow, which of course I declined because it was public housing as far as I was concerned. There are some exceptions to the properties that we're able to use these covenants on, and therefore it's also necessary for us to proceed with alternative powers, which are the one available to us that we intend to use, of which this report specifically refers to, is an Article 4 direction, which colleagues will have heard a lot about Article 4 in the last year because we've used it on other occasions to do with community development for large-scale conversions of office blocks. We now have the power to restrict that permitted development, which again has enabled us to direct an application under permitted development in Pinnacles, able to instruct the applicant that in fact they now need planning permission. They're not going to get permitted development. However, we feel that if we proceeded to implement Article 4 directive immediately without giving 12 months notice, our legal advice is that anybody who was considering introducing an HMO which otherwise they would have been able to do without this Article 4 direction, then they would be able to claim compensation from the council, and therefore we consider it necessary to give the 12 months notice, which avoids any possibility of any claims for compensation. I would say that although I know G. Sullivan, who's already asked a question tonight, I tribute to her efforts in regard to HMOs. She's been extremely helpful and quite powerful, I would say, in pushing this issue to the fore. I know Sheila considers that we should proceed immediately with the Article 4, but I would say that there probably is only a small number of properties that we can't use the covenant powers on that are likely to come forward, and we certainly need to avoid any claims of compensation to the council. So I don't think in the end it's going to make that any significant difference to the provision of HMOs in the 12 months. It will give us that extra power, possibly at the end. And the reports suggest that we will review the situation at the end of the 12 months notice to see whether we genuinely need to proceed with the Article 4 directive at that particular stage. So, those are the three recommendations, and I hope the Cabinet will be able to agree with them.
Councillor Wilkinson, are you seconding?
I'm formally seconding this, Chair, thank you.
Councillor Dunn.
Chair, thank you. I really welcome this because in many areas we as councillors get a lot of complaints. They really cause a lot of nuisance to many neighbours when people actually just...
Sorry, can I just say that? Are we moving straight on the point to that question?
No, we should be. I was expecting a question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I haven't asked anything.
Right, we missed out the formal seconding. I was expecting a question. This is clearly coming on to a comment. We'll come back to Councillor Dunn if you don't mind. Any questions? Councillor Dunn.
Yes, thank you. Before my question, can I also welcome the opportunity? It's a long overdue that we've managed to get to this particular part. But can we also remind ourselves, and I do welcome the comments made by the Cabinet member, that not all landlords are bad landlords. We actually have a lot of good landlords that really support their tenants. Multi-occupancy, and I agree with the Cabinet member, is vital to enable low-paid and hard-working people of our community to live and work locally and have choice. And I think we should never forget that even though we've got rogue landlords, we have good landlords and we should celebrate them.
Councillor Duncan, we are...
My question is, hang on, I did say the question was, but when I talk about landlords, the rogue ones are more interested in profit before people and costs over community. So my question is, what assurances can be given to the good landlords of Harlow about these proposed changes, and what will be the financial impact on them?
Thank you, Councillor Dunn.
Well, there isn't any direct financial impact of us applying these powers. The question is whether we consider it appropriate for any particular application for the setting up of an HMO to be permissible in a particular place. We also would obviously take into account the reputation and the history of any. In effect, landlords will understand the conditions that they will need to meet in order for them to be successful in an application for an HMO. Obviously, if they've got existing HMO, well then until as such the property changes hands, that licensing will be able to continue.
Sorry, can I just come back for a point of clarification? So are we saying that actually the licences will be free of charge and that landlords will not be charged for any services provided by the council to carry out this action?
They won't be charged when they put in an application, and if the application is approved, then obviously they will need a licence, which they will pay the normal licence fee that's set out in the council conditions. There aren't any additional charges in this respect.
Thank you.
Councillor Harlow.
I'm getting a bit confused. So you're looking for a blanket covenant enforcement across the whole town. So are you going to apply that to every HMO that currently exists, or are you going to be selective to those that are misbehaving? And also, you mentioned lodgers. Obviously, anybody taking a lodger will be a breach of the covenant. I presume they're going to be in some way excluded, or are they not?
Well, I think Councillor Hardware is trying to make a bit of mischief here. Obviously, what we're talking about is powers we've only recently confirmed that we have, and which we're only starting to apply. So, in fact, these powers, covenant powers, are being used for new applications. Existing, I've already, I thought I said that existing HMOs wouldn't be, nothing would change unless, of course, they're not fulfilling the terms of their licence. But existing HMOs will obviously carry on with the existing situation unless and until the property changes hands, in which case we will then regard it as a new application. As far as somebody taking in a lodger, well, I mean, this really is, that's why we need a code of conduct and a set of conditions, because this really is to address the issue where the person who owns the building doesn't actually live in the premises. They're just doing it as a profit-making enterprise. People who live in the HMO usually don't know each other, and they usually don't know the landlord either.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you, Councillor Purton. Councillor Harlow?
Just come back with a question, two points. That the covenant's been in existence for quite a long time in many of the properties, and a breach of covenant is a breach of covenant. Are you going to be selectively enforcing the covenant or not?
That's why we need a code of conduct, so that we're not in any way using the application of the covenant, the power of the application of the covenant in any way that can be construed as being, personal or any other consideration other than objective factors.
So, yes. I think what's clear, Councillor Hardware, is that we recognise that well-run HMOs in the right place are an important part of the mix of housing that's available. Correct. This is designed to limit HMOs that are in the wrong place by virtue of the fact that there may be several side by side. The powers that we're using are meant to limit those which have been badly run. Well-run HMOs in the right place have nothing to fear.
My issue is that, and you probably already have legal advice on this, is that selectively applying covenant,
which is why we need a code of conduct so that so when and how it's applied is seen to be transparent and fair.
And when's that coming forward?
So the planning and the legal services team in the council have jointly produced a checklist of looking at the criteria by which a covenant could be released or varied. That's been subject to external legal advice through a barrister specialising in this field who has said that we would be legally compliant using that checklist. So that's what we'll now start to use. So to give you some assurance that there will be a robust process that is where we can ensure that every application is treated equally.
Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say to Sheila Sutherland, who has sat through many meetings with quiet dignity, who's also, like many councillors, a fellow leisure zone gym goer, thank you for what she has done. I think everyone here agrees that we need to attack the abuse of address the abuse of HMOs. My question is associated with the legal advice, and again, Andrew Bramage was very kind to go through that with Councillor Carter and I earlier this week. But in terms of paragraphs 17, 18 and 19 on page 283, I think there are a number of elements around this and the mitigations, and I understand the way that this has been constructed over the 12-month period. What I would be grateful for, and I think all councillors would like to see sight of that barrister's legal advice where it is appropriate, but would the council, in terms of being belt and braces on this, because it's important to get this right, consider a 6-month review, taking into consideration any wider external factors that may play into this debate. And I know that we had that discussion, Andrew, earlier this week. I just think it's really important, and I know that other councils would agree, that we get belt and braces on this, we get the legals right, but I do want to see that barrister's advice in whatever appropriate form that may be.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd be happy to share that. But in relation to the issue about the 6-month review, we will be reviewing this throughout the next 12 months, but we have to, by law, have a 12-month period before we could implement this, because that would avoid the council being subject to potentially very sizable compensation claims. But it's something we will be reviewing throughout the year. It's also worth pointing out one of the modifications put in place by the local planning inspector in relation to HMOs is that the council is now required to conduct a review of the new HMO policy in the local plan within 2 years of the adoption of the plan. So that will be another measure by which we can identify whether that policy under Article 4 direction is working effectively, or whether it's too heavy-handed, or whether we need to make it stronger. But there'll be a further check on that in 2 years' time as well.
Yeah, I just add, well, first of all, I welcome the support of the opposition for the proposals in this report, but I would also suggest that 6 months is probably too early, because we are recruiting inspection staff for HMOs, and it's going to take them some time to get their processes in proper order, and for us to get data back on what's really happening in places where we're receiving complaints from. So I think, although it's as well to, as Andrew has said, keep the matter under constant review, I think we can only come to some conclusion, coincident with the 12 months notice that we're applying to the Article 4. So I think that's a much more straightforward point at which we can look at the whole, we can look at all the data we've gathered from the inspectorate, we can look at any objections to the notice. It's an appropriate point at which we will review our whole policy and decide how to go forward.
Any other questions?
Thank you. We're looking at page 284 for the agenda. Maybe there are some elements I haven't quite grasped. From what the portfolio was saying earlier, it sounds as though existing HMO licence holders will not be affected by this until their licence expires or they dispose of the property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the good landlords we have at the moment have nothing to fear.
That's what we just said. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's what you said.
Okay. We obviously all welcome some effective form of enforcement on HMOs. I mean, all of us have had complaints about properties, noise, parking, rubbish, everything else like this. It's clearly something needs to be done. And this is obviously part of the way forward. And as Councillor Durkin has already alluded to, HMOs provide a very useful service, certainly to streets to homes, but also to the council in providing temporary accommodation, short-term accommodation, cheap accommodation. Now, over time, if this policy is allowed to continue with the requirement that there should be one parking space per room, then HMOs will dry up. because there are very few properties in Harlow that can provide that degree of parking. Even for 3-bedroom houses, it's going to be very difficult to provide. So I have to ask, really, whether the council, whether the portfolio holder, has actually given enough thought to the implications of such a requirement. As I say, you know, we need to do something, and this goes, you know, quite a long way to actually doing it. But I'm not sure that the parking issue is going to help maintain a supply of good, you know, well-managed HMOs.
Yes, Chair, I'm afraid Councillor Carter's confusing the two things. There's the covenant powers, which relate to the requirement that was placed on all dwellings handed over to the council in 1978, that those properties can only be used for single-family occupancy and cannot be used for commercial use. There's also reference to the buildings not being erected in the garden. Well, obviously, the Development Corporation is very far-sighted, because I mean, none of what happens in other places now was happening then, but they obviously saw that it might. So the covenant process doesn't refer to parking, which is the powers we've got at the moment that we're starting to use now. The requirements for parking are part of the Article 4 directive, which we're giving 12 months notice for considering implementation. And I have to say that the requirement for parking, however suitable it might be in some places where there are severe parking problems, is one of the reasons why, in the end, we may decide that the Article 4 directive is too big a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Because if we adopt the Article 4 directive, we have to apply those conditions to every single property. And in effect, Councillor Carter's quite right. If we applied that policy, we would in effect be saying there couldn't possibly be any, unless you had a great big house which had its own grounds and could provide parking spaces. So that is one of the reasons, or that's one of the factors that we'll have to consider when we look to whether we're going to take on the Article 4 powers or not. But the covenant powers, which we use at the moment, don't refer to parking at all. And obviously, when they were drawn up in the 60s, nobody had cars anyway. They had roller skates.
Right, any further questions?
So, if I can just go back on that. Yes, clearly government control and the Alcohol Directive are two separate elements. But my question applies to both elements. If you're going to be using or enforcing the covenant control, you are going to be limiting the number of properties available for HMOs. Okay, the covenant only covers those properties which were transferred to the council originally and then subject to right to buy, so there'll be quite a lot of other properties around the town which will not be covered by covenant control. So what controls will you be exercising on those?
Well, as I've already mentioned, yes, there are a significant number of properties that don't fall into the category of those properties that were transferred to the council in 1978. But in our experience, those properties are not the ones that are being converted into HMOs.
Really?
So,
Sorry. You haven't answered the question about the impact of the covenant control on
the
supply
covenant
of HMOs.
control, because it's a power that is unique to us, we have the benefit of the covenant control. If we consider that an application from an HMO is acceptable for whatever reasons, see, it's in the right place, it's run by a suitable landlord, we can waive the covenant. Right. We can choose whether to enforce the covenant or not. The fact is, the covenant gives us the power to enforce it or not enforce it. the fact is that up until recently, unfortunately, it hasn't been enforced. And people have been allowed to, if you like, get a licence from the council without government powers being used, when perhaps they may be.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Carter and Councillor Burton strayed slightly into the question I was going to ask, but I think it's important to ask. What reassurances can the portfolio holder give to property holders who, or tenants, who have a property that postdates 1978, and I'm thinking Catherine's, Sumner's, Church Lane, Newhall, Gilden Way, who in a year's time, the council is successfully, I hope, using the covenant control to stop bad landlords of HMOs in the areas that they can, but then decides, because of some of the issues that have been discussed tonight, to not go for the full Article 4 direction. What reassurances can Councillor Perkin give those residents in those areas that what's going to happen is not the bad landlords will move out of the covenant control areas and move into these new areas?
Well, it's a hypothetical situation.
It's a very probable hypothetical situation.
Which obviously will be taken into account when we do the review. What you're really asking me is what am I going to decide in 12 months' time? I can't tell you what we decide in 12 months' time. We'll see when we reach that point and you get the outcome of the review.
I think it's a very interesting point you make, and certainly be a part of the review.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, any statements? Are we happy to...
Could I just
Oh,
say,
no,
because
sorry.
there's so much negativity about this. Danny has actually really worked hard to actually get this to the forefront. This is an outstanding issue for people of Harlow. The way it's actually being treated by the opposition, anybody would think that, the landlords are actually paramount in this. At the end of the day, this is a situation where unscrupulous landlords are even converting things like their own conservatories. In Penny, there's a house that's actually been converted. The living room has actually been divided up. There are 8 people, 8 separate dwellings in that one family house alone. The rubbish overflows outside the front garden. It's an absolute disgrace. It's just one of many that we could actually all detail. Danny's done an awful hard work on this, and there shouldn't be any prevarication about it. The way in which he's described it seems very straightforward to me. It's an attack on very bad landlords in this town. I know the opposition don't like history lessons, but 40 years ago, £4 billion, I don't know how much that would be in today's terms, was actually being provided by central government to local authorities for housing. Now there is nothing for housing. At the end of the day, that's the fundamental issue that needs to be addressed. If we're to get away from this situation, we need to get back to actually building decent housing, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. And that's the way forward, Chair. And actually saying that this policy is something that is difficult, okay, but I think it's the way forward, and I think Danny should be congratulated in the way in which he's actually determinedly pursued that. And I also hats off to Sheila Sullivan from Morley Grove. Well, Morley Grove's actually been plagued with this for years, and at the end of the day, hopefully there's going to be some resolution to this. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Johnson and then Councillor...
I'm quite glad to go first.
Thank you very much. I wouldn't want Councillor Danners to think that we were not supportive of this at all, and I think the majority of members on this side of the chamber that have spoken have all indicated that they are supportive of this. We all recognise that there are some really dodgy HMOs out there. We all recognise that actually there's a very good section of HMOs and that it's a minority that spoils it for the majority. But that being said, there are bad landlords out there and there are bad HMOs out there that do need controlling. So as a number of members on my side have said in their questions, we do support any measures that will do that. I don't think, Chair, that the questions, as indeed you yourself have said, my question about the implementation of this is unreasonable, and I think that's why Councillor Charles was seeking a 6-monthly review. Given what the portfolio holder has said about that not being appropriate due to the incoming staff and the need to monitor this over the next 12 months, can I ask instead, Chair, that you consider a regular update to forthcoming Cabinet meetings on the process of this, given it is an area that affects all members of the town, and it's an area that is of interest, given clearly the amount of discussion that it's generated tonight.
Comments noted, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. In comments to some of the concerns raised by Councillor Johnson tonight regarding certain areas that are covered by this and certain areas that are not covered by this, I think it's timely to remind people about the comments made by Housing on page 285 of tonight's agenda, which clearly states the approach recommended supports the Council's broader strategy in raising standards in the private rented sector by both recognising the growing role of the private rented sector in tackling housing need, as well as enhancing the requirements to enforce poor standards where appropriate. Absolutely.
Right. Are we happy to accept recommendations A, B and C on page 279?
Agreed.